and went to the UN, where they thought that that would be the place where they'd resolve the Vietnam War. But this is what Goldberg was like. We're watching television, and on television they're showing some hospital that needs some kind of medicine or something. And he knows that they have an army base nearby. And so what does he do? He's sitting there watching, and he calls up the general who's in charge of the army base, and he says, "General, I have a great idea for you. Why don't you take this armored car, whatever it is, and take this thing they need and bring it over there, and you're going to be a hero." He says, so there we are. I mean, he was an activist in that particular way. And he was a great enthusiast, and we loved being around him, and it was fun. But the Warren Court was, in my opinion, looking back on it, a court with a mission. And that mission stemmed from those words, equal protection of the law. You looked around in the 50s, as you know, a lot of us can remember, in a third of the country at least, there was no equal protection at all. It wasn't even a close question. And my goodness. And but that was the world then. So he reads this, as the others did then, and they said, well, this is what it says, and this is what we're going to do, and that was Brown. And my goodness, it was idealistic, but practical, because they wanted it to happen. And what they wanted to happen, since they're first and foremost judges, is they want that legal superstructure, that legal, complex set of rules that supported a system of segregation. They wanted it dismantled. And they wanted children actually to be going to that school, which was an integrated school. Now, dismantling that system, legal system, of segregation, and stopping all the end runs, so forth, legally, was a very complex job. And looking back as a law clerk, I can see that that's what that court was about, first and foremost. And they were going to do their absolute best. Cooper versus Aaron's. Well, I mean, all kinds of cases that came up. And my goodness, that was work for thousands and thousands of lawyers who were trying to get this job done. So that's what that court was about. And they did a service to the country and to the law.
You sound almost nostalgic when you talk about the practical idealism of the Warren Court. So the question is, does this current court, have a mission? Should it? And if not, what should the mission be?
It's a different world now. It's a different world. And and the legal problems change, and the educational problem changes, and the country's changes, and there are important problems. And that one isn't totally solved, but my goodness, I mean, we understand where we are now, and we shake our heads looking back on that issue. And but it's a different world, and the court is different, and the law is different, and the problems are different. You don't suddenly think that every solution to a different problem is the right way for a court to deal with problems that are different. Okay, so no, I'm not nostalgic. I'm nostalgic for my own youth. I mean, who isn't?
Justice, who do you think, who or what do you think played the greatest role in shaping your values and your view of the world?
No, if I ask you that question, you say you go back to your high school. I mean, I think I grew up in San Francisco in the 50s, and I went to a public high school. It was a good high school. San Francisco was a great place then to grow up. I mean, it's the West. You know, we thought we were the West. I realize you in Colorado didn't, but I mean, but we did, and. There was a world then, a certain kind of world. That's what I grew up in. And it was great. I liked it. There were a lot of problems going on, but I was oblivious probably to half of them. But nonetheless, of course, that's what really shapes you. And I think if I think of people, of course Arthur Goldberg had an influence. And Archie Cox. I mean, in that Watergate, you mentioned that. And of course your teachers do, and so forth. Even that's little. But I mean, Archie. I mean, Archie Cox was one of the things that characterized Archie, and the reason, which I remember, that talk he gave when he was fired, and he said he understood that his job was a difficult one. He's not out to get the President of the United States. And he said, I wonder if I've gotten too big for my britches. He says, that's what I asked myself. Now that's a New England reaction there, and it's an interesting one and a good one. And what he was trying to do is follow this thing where it leads. Where it leads is where it leads. And I think I learned something from that, and I think it's about honesty, really. And, I can't prove that. But I admire Archie. And I admired Arthur Goldberg. I've admired a lot of people. I liked working for Senator Kennedy. I loved working in the Senate. That's where you see that the power is in the hands of the people. I'm sitting there one day in my office. I was chief counsel of the committee, and some young lady comes in, and actually she got in before I did because I found her looking through all my books. There's a law books there. So I said, excuse me, why is this young lady going through all of my law books as I'm sitting there in my office? And she'd come from, and I think to myself, now wait a minute here. She may be a constituent. And it's at that point I knew where the power in the United States resides.
When you describe it that way, Justice Breyer, the connection between these experiences, we understand the source of your philosophy. Pragmatism, bringing people together, comes from your father, comes from Senator Kennedy. How important is this biography, temperament, in shaping judicial philosophy?
Well, that again is not my department. You unfortunately have, but you have the kind of job where the readers want labels. They want predictions. And they want to see the judges as people. All right? So you have to try to give them that. And that isn't my job. My job is to try to remember I have a black robe because the law speaks through the judges. And my personality should be abstracted from it. And every human being is the product. Of course your youth is important, but I'll leave that to somebody else, not to me. Because why people might be interested in me is because I have a job as a judge where I better be a judge. And I'm not out there to explain myself. And I'm not out there to explain why I happen psychologically to think one way or another. And people aren't to judge me on that. In fact, they're not to judge me. They're to judge whether they agree or disagree or how it might be modified, that opinion, that view of the law. That's what is of interest in what I do, like what you do. So go speculate. I don't mind. If you find something in that mirror ground, we score for good.
I'll put my interns on it.
All right. Right.
If you could suggest one reading assignment for today's youth, what would it be?
Oh, but that's a good question. I don't know. One, in what? In law? You mean generally? Oh, golly. Somebody says, generally, what should you read? You should read Shakespeare. Okay, there we are. That's one.
How about lawyers?
Lawyers should read Shakespeare, too. What did I read recently that was very good? I'll go into that tomorrow. But we have a reading group for years, and so you come across things I'd never read, very surprising. And one of them, one of them we read not too long ago was Uncle Tom's Cabin. Have you ever read it? Most people have. I hadn't. And it's a good novel. A very good novel. It's not a political tract, as many thought it was. It's not. Very interesting. So if you haven't read it, I'll recommend it. Some other Conrad. Read Conrad. I love Conrad. Okay, there we are.
You care a lot about persuasion and discussion, Justice Breyer, and it's striking to read accounts of the Rehnquist court, the last court, and note how little discussion there was. You went around the table, efficiency was important, you all voted. It didn't sound like there was a lot of give and take. Is there more under Chief Justice Roberts? And should there be more still?
I learned something from Chief Justice Rehnquist that was of value to me. Well, and one day he happened to remark